Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martijn Lofvers. I'm the Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media. I'm also the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement, a European quarterly magazine, but also bi-weekly newsletter and a huge LinkedIn group, I think over 50,000 members worldwide. And I'm also the architect of the IT Supply Map Europe. I will explain later what it is. We'll have a live 60 minutes conversation about how to survive the shakeup, stay agile during compliance shifts and disruption. It's a turbulent times, and we are going to discuss tariffs, customs, supply chain, etc. So bear with me, and I have invited two experts. First, Dr. Johannes Hangl. Hello, thank you, welcome.
Hi, nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
And maybe a short, how did you become a doctor? So what did you research, and is it still relevant?
Yeah, very good question. So I'm a doctor in AI and supply chain. So my topic was around challenges, the benefits, but also the barriers of adoption of using AI in supply chain. I have to admit, it's 2 years now since I have my doctoral grade. It's almost outdated already, the study, because as you all know, AI is moving so fast. There's so many things going on, especially also in supply chain, but also in the private world, if you think about chatbots and Copilot and all of these things. And yeah, I love AI. I have to admit, I'm using it every day. I have my own ChatGPT agents, and it's great to be here and speak a little bit about the tariffs, speak about all the uncertainty around the world, but also around what can we do with AI in supply chain.
Okay, thanks. And next, David Strauss. You've been around in this world over 20 years, SaaS and supply chain in the cloud. So welcome.
Hi, good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, and we'll talk about e2open, also about the application, but also the kind of customers you're serving and how things are moving in your area. A few practical things. So this webinar will be recorded and will be made available within 48 hours on YouTube. Also, the PDF will be made available. So the audience is on mute, but you can interact with us. You see on the right-hand side the chat functionality. Yeah, you can chat, but I won't follow that. I will check the Q&A function down below. So if you have questions to one of us, please use the Q&A bubble on the right-hand side. Questions, you can even vote on questions, and then we can, interact with you. And if the questions are relevant or, in line of what we're discussing at the moment, I will ask these questions right away. If not, I will reserve the questions for the Q&A at the end. And next, we have an extra 30 minutes at the end. So if you want to interact further with us after the whole hour, we will be sitting down in a virtual lounge and we have an extra conversation, and you can share some more thoughts with us. As of this moment, we will put off the camera. So we have, you can have enlarge the screen, and then you have a better view on the slides. All right. So next, like I said, I'm the architect of the IT Supply Map. This is how it looks like. You see all kind of vendors, the well-known names, with proven track records in Europe, based on all kind of data. And we have thresholds, so not everybody will get some supply station if they say they offer something. No, they should have implemented in Europe a certain amount of number of applications. And yes, e2open is also on it, and as you can see, e2open has acquired quite a few vendors in the past, but they have all moved them into their cloud environment. So David, what is your take on this? If you look at this, your representation of e2open on this IT Supply Map?
Well, it definitely represents the breadth of our portfolio, which was the plan. So you mentioned how long I've been around. I just looked. It's 11 years and 9 days that I've been with e2open. So we've gone from 350 people up to now 4,000 through organic growth and these acquisitions, where we have that end-to-end supply chain, right? You have the downstream, you have the upstream, you have the logistics, you have the planning, and you have today's topic, the global trade, which have come together pretty well over the last, well, it's not even 11 years, because we haven't done any big acquisitions in a good 4 years. So been quite stable. However, as you know, we have just been acquired by WiseTech, so big logistics footprint there. So
yeah. But it's all cloud related to what we see here. That's
But everything, you on-prem is dead, right? Yes, that's as simple as that is. You have to be in the cloud, and especially supply chain, right? Because it's so networked, it's in the middle of the processes, right? It's in the middle of the enterprise. It has to interface with so many external parties that being on-premise makes things very difficult from a security, middleware integration, upgrades, etc. perspective. When I started in this industry, we didn't even call it cloud, and the company I was working for was doing exactly that. They'd been doing it from before the internet with leased lines. There was a good reason not to do on-premise.
And actually, there's some things going on in the world, and what we see here, this is an overview of what CFOs and CEOs are talking about in the quarterly earning calls with analysts and those kind of audience. So on the right hand side, you see topics mentioned more and more compared to last quarter, and above the line the changes compared to the previous quarter, and a German startup has scraping this and creating this overview since 2020. So you see that supply chains since the start of COVID has been there every quarter. So that's one thing. If you look at this, David, what is your take? If you look at all these tariffs mentioned by board members of big companies in the US?
Well, like the reason why we're here today is that we've been doing trade policy or trade related services and solutions in supply chain forever. So just like seeing supply chain at the top right kind of makes we feel warm and relevant. Seeing trade on the top right makes me feel warm and relevant. Unfortunately, it's for the wrong reasons, right? It's because we have a supply chain crisis, is because we have trade wars. But because Johannes especially and myself and the rest of the team have been in this world for so long, it's nice to be appreciated for a change.
Yeah, and Johannes, if you look at last quarter's overview of the topic mentioned, you see some shift, and I added some arrows to see where's recession coming from and what's happening to tariffs. If you look at it, what is your take if you have a look at this graph?
It's super interesting because I saw tariffs is still a hot topic, but if I see tariffs and uncertainty, they almost belong together because we have a tariff uncertainty. We don't know if the American regulatory arms under Trump, what are the decision tomorrow and what are they doing? So there is a lot of uncertainty. I'm wondering why the tariff shift is, but maybe it's because a lot of the things are sorted using FTC, so foreign trade zones, pushing a lot of material into the US, and also maybe that people know now that there is a lot of changes, so people not discussing too much about that because it's already a day-to-day thing.
Yeah, but things are changing. Early this year, when the tariff turmoil started, you saw a lot of front-loading, companies moving their stuff to the US, and then you saw a dip in the second quarter, and now a smaller peak in the third quarter. So maybe companies think they have it under control. What do you think,
Spoiler
Johannes?
alert.
Yeah, it's hard to say they have it under control because again there is still, and we discussed it a little bit further also afterwards, there is a geopolitical fragmentation. And if you think about, I don't want to say West against the East, but there is a trend that Western let's say countries go more into restrictions, adding more restrictions, and on the other side, also Asia Pacific adding restrictions with the rare earths thing, but also opening up on the other hand with new trade agreements. So there is some tension and there is a lot of movement if we think about global trade.
So I've seen this overview, like I said, since 2020, and I created the next slide myself since the early 2020. Starting with COVID, and we see a lot of black swans that were hitting the supply chains in the last 5 years. So COVID leading to lockdowns, leading to shortages, etc. The war in Ukraine, we had a shortage in gas supply, leading to extra cost. We have Gaza 2 years ago. and that's leading to the blockage of Red Sea, also rising cost. And then Trump, number 4, as a black swan, especially the tariffs. That's basically the black swan, is leading to cost and inflation, etc. But the main thing here is it's cause and effect. It's leading to bullwhips, and that's the main thing. Maybe CFOs and CEOs are not aware of too much, or don't understand too much, but supply chain people do know the bullwhips, and I think that's the main thing of this graph. Johannes, if you look at this, what is your take if you look at this graph?
Yeah, I think, Martin, you nailed it down. And if you see the arrows, how they come together, for sure the war or the crisis in the Ukraine with Russia, there is a shortage or also a cost increase in gas that's hitting Europe very hard, because companies only can produce when they have cheap energy, which is increasing the costs. On this other side, also Trump with all the new tariffs which are in, and China with almost up to 200% on certain products, makes also a cost increase for that, which ultimately comes to inflation, because the end consumer needs to pay more for the same product. And then talking about the bullwhip effect, if you think about that, it makes also sense, because you mentioned it rightly that with the new announcements the Trump authority did, a lot of companies pushed in a lot of material in the US. But maybe not all materials can be consumed, not all materials are used. So they are now on stock. They can't sell it. They need to reduce the prices, which also increases the costs then for the company. So I think you nailed this slide very well down.
So I read earlier today that recent studies claim that from US firms who have international supply chain, 40% of the total unit cost growth is attributed to tariffs. So 40%, 40, of total unit cost growth is attributed to tariffs. And that's a lot.
Yeah, and you can think about, if you have on the one side the derivative duties, we have section 232 for aluminium and steel, we have chapter 301 for China products. That's really a real big cost bump, because as mentioned before, there are products depending on what ingredients are inside, or if you use steel products and Chinese steel, there is up to 250, almost 300% for these products. And if it's ingredients or part products for a bigger products, for sure the costs are increasing heavily.
Yeah. So let's talk about what you can do as companies, considering all these challenges. So what's changing in the global trade and how it impacts your operations? Maybe Johannes, you can talk about the different views on this.
Yeah, you have asked me like what are the topics in global trade, and I narrowed it down to 3 main areas. One is this geopolitical fragmentation. What I mean with that are additional sanctions, are export controls, which are almost like the new normal for most of the companies. Then the second pillar is this trade policy volatility, because shifting tariffs, and one day the Trump announced 39% for Swiss, then the next day it's 30%. So it's almost like a new negotiation playground, which in the past wasn't like that, because usually you have trade agreements, they are negotiated, it takes up to 10 years sometimes until a trade agreement is ratified, and then it comes in force and it stays in force for a very long time with small adjustments. And in the third pillar, I think it's in every industry, it's all across the world, is really this AI-powered digital transformation. On the one side in supply chain, but for sure also heavily reliant for global trade. And down below, I said, hey, what companies want to achieve is supply chain resilience, which means we have on the one side, and it's almost like a fight or a big struggle between, on the one side, globalization. We want to cheaply source products all over the world. But on the other side, there is a risk associated to that. And there is this friendshoring or regionalization, where you say, hey, I just buy where it's maybe from a political perspective very stable. And that keeps all supply chain people, but also global trade people really awake in the night.
Yeah.
And we can go now deeper. Yeah.
Yeah. We go deeper into each individual block. But you mentioned the Swiss tariffs, 39%, but for pharma, it's 100% out of nowhere. So, and that's also, scaring, the dot into the pharma companies from Switzerland. That's impacting more apart from the 39%.
Yeah, and the thing is, and I don't want to be too political, but it's almost like tariffs are now used as a negotiation strategy, because the book Trump released, I think in the 80s it was, about how to negotiate. And some of the tactics he are using now, we see in life, in action, so to say, because it was the same with the EU, where he put up an anchor very high, and then he negotiated down, but it's still higher than the tariffs which we had for years, which makes it pretty hard and also very, very uncertain for a lot of companies to deal with that.
So let's move into the geopolitical fragmentation. So what do you see in the different continents?
Yeah, I almost narrowed it down to three big blocks. On the one side, United States, Europe, and Asia. And if we begin with the United States, there was really a record volume of regulatory changes in the US. If I recall it right, there was 5 major new export control regulations which has been published, and especially targeting very sensitive sectors like advanced semiconductor, AI technology, but also some supercomputing hardware. You have seen that with NVIDIA, for example, with the chips. Then the new US entity list is in place, which restricts export to really problematic companies, but also individuals. It has grown, and the numbers seem to be low, like 140 new entries in 25. But it now means like we have almost like 3,350 restricted entity on this list. And now, and it's fresh from the press since last week, the new BIS 50% entity list, or also called as the affiliates list, is also in place. So there is a lot of new traction and a lot of new regulations, and you see that all over the place. You see that in Europe. I mentioned before the 18th comprehensive sanction package, where we have also additional 300 products and hundreds of financial restrictions implied, but also the fight back almost from Asia, where Asia also got 6 new major export control and compliance regulations in place. And I think it's one of the really strongest tightenings we have seen so far, because it's almost like a regulatory fight of trying to push technology out of specific countries. Also restrictions, as mentioned before, with the seldom earth. There are more than 40 rare earths which are now subject to licenses if you want to export that or import that into a specific country. Also, dual-use technology from China is highly restricted. To quickly summarize, I know I'm talking a lot here, but it's really, if you see US, EU, and China have really increased the numbers of products, technologies, and partners which they are monitoring, which are restricted in a way we have never seen so far. It's really the largest numbers of entities added.
If you look, in the Netherlands, we have a company called ASML. They make a wafer stepper machine for NVIDIA and Intel and the likes. And there are some also regulations from the US not to export to China, etc. But it has a lot of implications for the tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers also. So that's my question to you, Johannes. What does this mean for companies within the supply chain with all this?
Yeah, it makes it not easier. if you think about there was this German Supply Chain Act, but also the European Supply Chain Act, where we also wanted to have a transparency, all the tiers down. But with some of these regulations, and especially the one in the United States with the 50% entity list, because this means, similar to the OFAC 50% list, that even if the company by itself is not restricted, but some of the subsidiaries are restricted, you have to see it as a restricted company. And that adds additional complexity, because then you need to go down your whole supply chain. Where is the stuff coming from? And US has this extraterritorial right. So even if you don't have operations in the US, but you sell in Europe or you source something and there is US technology inside, you still need to consider it and consider also the United States regulatory requirements. And that makes it very complex, because sometimes you don't really know where the stuff is coming from.
So David, as e2open, you have a solution for global trade management. How does that help for a company to have all these challenges?
Well, there's multiple, multiple angles with which the software helps. The best way is if you do all of them at once in an orchestrated process, but even individual ones do help. So just the basic classification, which you should have been doing all along, even before the tariffs, we can massively help with that, and we have all the global knowledge capabilities, etc. Then, in terms of once you have some sort of data to find out, am I compliant? What is the law that applies? That is the solution, right? That's the core of our global trade solutions. And then it goes further, because within those, that same UI, UX, we were talking about UX earlier, of which our customers, trade experts, are using on a day-to-day basis, they can do things like supplier solicitation, right? So go to my tier 1 or tier 2 supplier and get them to deliver me the bill of material or some certificate which says these are the metal components, or these are the bits of data which you're going to need to comply with everything we see on the screen here, right? Those are the, so you have the compliance at the data at the structural level, right? In terms of classifications, bill of materials, constants, your multi-tier supply chain, and you have it at the transactional level. What is the record which I must keep? In some cases, it goes in a declaration. In some cases, it goes in a broker pack or whatever else, or I'm just doing risk evaluation in the case of restricted party, and I'm keeping all of that documentation to prove, hey, I'm doing my utmost to stay compliant. That's just a little bit of what we do.
Yeah. So maybe, Johannes, we move, what David just mentioned, into the trade policy environment. Maybe you can tell, about these fields. How do they hit the supply chains?
Yeah, that's and again, if we bring it down to United States, Europe, and Asia, I think it's almost two forces fighting against each other. Because on the one side, we have the Asia Pacific area, but also Europe, certainly on certain in certain areas, opening up, want to have more trade agreements, having more free trade along the partnership. But also on the other side, the United States, and you see it here on the slide with Section 232, Section 301, where new tariffs come into play, which makes it quite tricky. Because from a European angle, we only know, hey, we have to classify the product with the HS code, and then based on the HS code, you have either additional duties, you have tariffs, and things like that. In the US, the concept is slightly different. You have a primary HS code, and then you have additional secondary HS codes. You may know that with Chapter 89, Chapter 99, things like that. Which means now, if you want to import something into the United States, and you maybe import a table, and this has steel products inside, which are coming from China, you cannot just say, hey, this is country of origin Mexico. Now you have to give the authority, the customs authority, almost a bill of material saying, hey, how much of this product, of the end product, has maybe steel of Chinese origin, which makes it a completely different calculation, makes a completely different ballpark game. On the good side, I don't want to bash the United States too much. There is also new trade agreements about US-Japan is live in July. So that helps also if you have business there to reduce duties. UK and US have a trade deal which is under negotiation. The really big things from Asia Pacific perspective are the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. It's in force since 2020, and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement of Trans-Pacific Partnership. They have always this really huge names, which is in place since 2018, where UK now decided to join since last December. And these combined, just to give you a kind of a rough figure, accounts for approximately 8.2 trillion US dollars in total trade volume. And it's almost like 40% of the world population, which means Asia is a big player. Asia has a lot of volume to trade with. For sure, US makes it kind of harder. As you mentioned, prices are getting 40% up, 50% up for products coming from Asia. But Asia is also looking into other regions where they can strong their region, where you have, let's say, maybe deals where Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uganda come together with Europe to have the EU-Mercosur, but also, let's say, the India and European Free Trade Agreement. So there's, and it's two, this word is two-sided, or the two sides of the coin. There is for sure on the one side, some governments say we want to secure our own, let's say, market to not get cheap products inside. But on the other hand, there is also this globalization approach with more trade agreements.
If you look at Europe, I see CBAM, CSRD gets postponed a bit, or they have a lighter version of CSRD now with the omnibus legislation, that kind of stuff. But CBAM is still happening as of January 1st, 2026. So basically, it's basically dealing with aluminium, steel, and concrete. If you importing this kind of stuff out of Vietnam into Europe, then you'll be hit by CBAM in Europe. So maybe that's something that's still happening. It's going to happen. So that is not postponed, but that's also in here. To be honest.
Yeah, it's in here, and that's kind of the. I'm not saying the regulation is not good, but it adds a lot of complexity for many companies.
Yes.
Thinking about CBAM, which there is a lot of force and back. I know it from a German perspective because I'm based in Munich. That we didn't even knew which authority we should give the reports to. So luckily they changed a lot of the things. It's still, I would say, in negotiation to come down to the fact, hey, it's starting on January 26, but it's still a lot of uncertainty here, and it adds complexity for all the companies because then you need to do the reporting and all of that, which makes it not easier. The same is on the other side for EUDR, which again was postponed now a little bit longer. But if you need to track it down to the source, to the field, and you need the GPS data and all of that, it's sometimes very tricky to really go down all the tiers to identify, is it the supplier I'm sourcing from? Is it the right thing I'm getting it from?
But in the end, it's a good thing that you have transparency of your bill of material, not only your tier 1, but also beyond tier 2 and beyond. So that's a good thing. We talk about end-to-end supply chain visibility, etc. So upstream, you need this kind of transparency anyway in the end to orchestrate your supply chain.
I agree. At the end of the day, it's a good thing. I'm not saying it's not a good thing, but also we should consider the companies and how easily you can integrate that, especially, and we have seen that in a lot of fight against the European and the German Supply Chain Act, because if you go down 1, 2, 3 tiers, that's something which is for most of the companies very reasonable. They know all of that. But if you need to go all the tiers down for all your products, makes it kind of a really challenging task.
Yeah. David, what you think if you look at that?
Well, the thing is that what we're seeing here is an effect which I saw already 20 years ago and has been there forever, which is when politics / legislation tries to like grab the steering wheel of something like global supply chains and try to impact it for the reason you said, or that Johannes said, right, to protect and to have less risk and all of that. But at the same time, all of our wealth development in the last 50, 100 years has been because of global trade, right? So you have these two things going in opposite directions, and the supply chains and the businesses will always somehow route around it, right? They'll reconfigure in a
Yep.
way that goes around it. But in the end, it's just added cost. So for instance, when we talk about, is it good to have my end-to-end bill of material multi-tiers across all the tiers of the supply chain on an idealistic philosophical level? Yeah, maybe. On a practical level, not really. I need my critical components. I
Yep.
need the components where I'm exposed on ESG, but there are so many where the equation is just solved. There are 3 providers in the world. Their name is on the stock market. They're under a million kinds of audits. Let's just move on. What I think might have happened is that politicians of multiple levels talked to supply chain leaders and CEOs and heard the word end-to-end supply chain, said, cool, we're going to do that. We're going to make it law to do that because of the slave labor and because of the blood minerals and because of CO2 and because of tariffs, not realizing that the level of granularity that you are generating with that is very rapidly in an area of diminishing returns, right? Exactly what Johannes was saying. 1 tier, 2 tier, yep, critical components at tier 3 if I have to, but anything beyond that you have more noise than signal, and it's just cost on top, and then people will just do other things.
Talk
Right.
about noise and signals. Johannes, you mentioned you have a third pillar of your introduction. So this is the third one, the AI-powered digital transformation. Maybe we can talk about this one because that's moving into supply chain deeper and deeper, and AI especially.
Yeah, and it's really my beloved topic to talk about. And if you think about global trade, I'm not talking about AI and supply chain. There is a lot of stuff, and I think David, you can also chime in then. But from a global trade perspective, what I have seen was what the most companies are requesting is for sure assisting in classification. So classifying my products, because it's not an easy task to classify a product for the harmonized tariff schedule code, which is slightly different for each country. Only the first 6 digits are the same, but also for the export control classification number, which implies specific licenses which you need if you ship a product from A to B. And all of that without AI needs a lot of people power, because they need, and we know how good the master data sometimes is. And if with all respect, if you say shit in, you get shit out. That's the problem. And if you do that in global trade, you are in serious concerns, because it can even be go so far that your allowance to ship products worldwide will be not anymore. And that's a big thing. So having tools like AI classification to help you coming up with suggestions, come up with explanatory notes, make it easier to classify is a good thing. And then it also reduces the misclassification. Other big topic, which is the number 1 topic here, is for sure the unstructured document processing. If you think how many companies still have outsourced service centers to get invoices typed in the system, or get certain things manually adjusted with tools, and it's much more than just OCR. Okay, OCR is there since many, many years, but OCR, always the problem, there was a person in the loop to say, hey, this field is this and this field is this, and if somebody changes something, the OCR doesn't work. With this AI technology, it's much easier to say, hey, I'm getting an invoice in, a packing list, bill of materials, whatever. it automatically creates me a shipment. If I have or identified something wrong, you can go back, change that and say, this is this field. And from the next time onwards, it's automatically recognizing that. So it helps really supply chains to automate things from the purchasing until it's delivered for certain documents. And maybe last but not least, one thing which I found also very interesting is chatbots. Many of us are using Copilot. Many of us are using ChatGPT or Grok or you name it, all of these things. What we thought from a e2open perspective, hey, why can we not use that in the supply chain, but also in global trade? So we have developed certain chatbots to make really complex trade data easy to understand. And you can simply think, and I think other companies are doing that as well, ask questions. Hey, what is happening if I ship this from A to B? What is the scenario if I source something from Thailand and China? What is my total landed cost? And you get instantly answers, which helps you then to maybe change, adopt things, make things smarter. But also, if you think about sales cycles, and I talked about restrictions at the beginning, you can simply give it to sales directors and say, hey, type in this company, and with AI, it's recognizing it's this company, checking for synonyms, and then giving you back, is this company restricted, yes or no, which makes a lot of processes smarter, easier, but also things like pattern screening a little bit easier. And that's the things which are drivers for supply chain and supply chain automation.
So you mentioned the optical character recognition earlier, OCR. Do you think that the current development of AI makes it easier to get better master data and get a better data for your global trade?
I believe very much into that, because what I have seen in our evolutions from, let's say, even the classification agent, when we started, you now can type in, I have a Samsung smartwatch, and the AI is smart enough to recognize it's a Samsung smartwatch, maybe asking some question, and based on that, give you a better product description. Or it's grabbing and crawling through the internet and scrolling through specific documents, specifications, and things like that in a scale a human being is not capable of. So at the end of the day, there is a lot of benefits in using AI and implementing AI in the supply chain.
David, question to you, because we discussed the whole portfolio briefly of e2open, and you've acquired Amber Road, Blue Jay Logistics, Terra Technology, and Steelwich in the past, and you have integrated all these kind of applications of SNOP, demand planning, WMS, TMS, etc., global trade management. If you look at all these kind of applications and you look at AI, where do you see the biggest benefits of AI in all those applications?
We don't have enough time to answer that question here. However, because we have at e2open a very comprehensive and differentiated view on that, if you follow some of our webinars, and like next week at our Connect customer event in Amsterdam, we'll be presenting a lot. So first off, e2open's been doing AI in supply chains since 2003, right? That's 22 years ago. It wasn't as sexy LLM talking AI as today, but it sure as heck was AI. So we know for a long time how to use this heavy technology at scale. Now, if we go from the user on backwards, what Johannes was just saying about the chatbots and conversational team members is definitely a thing, right? Because especially in global trade, but also in logistics, in supply chain, you often have too much data and you want to get a summary. And those chatbots are good at that. And because you're making a small amount of data out of a large amount of data, the risk of a hallucination is much smaller, because you're not desperately asking it to find something which isn't there. You're trying to remove stuff that is less important. So all of that in terms of data consumption, it's almost the next generation of visualization, or how to get insights from data. Then, of course, agentic is the big one, right? Once you have whatever algorithms and things to actually impact on that, but we're being very cautious on there. And then, we're going to be really boring, but forecasting, right? We've got things like universal forecasting and next generation optimization, etc., where that 22 years comes to bear, because everybody thinks that, oh, well, I've got this fantastic AI, I'm going to walk into a supply chain and save them 10%. I'm sorry, at least the customers which we deal with, Johannes, myself, e2open, they're really large global customers. Their supply chains are pretty good. Do they have problems? Yeah, but they're already optimized. They're the best on the planet at doing this stuff. And they're shaving 0.5% here, maybe 1% for a big transformational process. So we as e2open want to be very, very intelligent about deploying this where it has, again, the maximum amount of signal and the least amount of noise. And AI in supply chain, there's a heck of a lot of noise out there in the market.
Talking about the supply chain, maybe Johannes, how do you get supply chain resilience? Because that's a hot topic. A lot of companies, vendors, and consultancy are talking about. So maybe talk about supply chain and resilience. Maybe you can give your view on that.
Yeah, if you think about supply chain resilience, what it means for me is reducing dependency on specific suppliers or countries. Often we are different strategies, and as mentioned at the beginning, the trend was always globalization. I would say the trend is going a little bit backwards, maybe, and we can debate about that, to either going to almost like friendshoring, where you're saying, hey, if I'm sitting there, I maybe do with the ones where I think from a political perspective, it's much smoother to work with, to also reduce the dependencies. But also from another angle, if you see geopolitics, climate events, you mentioned also pandemics at the beginning, all of that. You need to build a supply chain which is succeeding against this black swan events. And that you can only do having the right analysis, understanding where are my bottlenecks, where are maybe suppliers where I could have a negative impact on. Do I have a possibility to get it somewhere else? Can I produce it by myself? And things like that. So that's really kind of the things if I think about supply chain resilience. But David, again, hey, please chime in if you have something to add here.
I think what you describe is exactly what is going to happen and what needs to happen, because we're in an emergency situation. And if if I've got a huge part of my product cost exposed to these things, I have to change. I owe that to my customers and to my shareholders. Going back to the start and your water diagram with the bullwhip, Martijn, right? That's the thing, right? If I friendshore everything, then all of me and my competitors within these regions are all going to be rushing towards that one or those 10 suppliers and are going to be overloading them. And then their prices are going to go up and their availability is going to go down. So I've gone from, from one bad place to another bad place, because now I haven't. So you have to be smart about these things, right? It's a classical bullwhip when you just move around without thinking, and everybody else moves around the supply or the demand in the same way. And I think what's going to happen, these things have a pendulum, is that for certain industries, it's like, oh my God, fantastic. We have protected our steel and aluminium. And you know what? We've even protected our AI industry. Great. Yeah, but we still need solar cells, or we still need something. And over there, there's now a group who are not as restrictive. Johannes was just mentioning 40% of the world's population who maybe have freer alliance, not just on trade, but on research, on co-development. And all of a sudden, they're developing 6-dimensional AI chips, and they're not sharing with the others because the others are being protectionist. So, it's not just about trade. It's not just about business. It's about invention and culture. And some of the next developments are going to require that continental scale, right? To have something the size of Asia are all investing and working on the next big thing, which will be as disruptive in 2050 as AI is in 2025.
So the interesting thing, if I look at this graph, it's a supply chain from left to right, from supplier side to the customer side or the end user side. But the most important thing is, you have your governments in place, with Trump and the tariffs, and you see also mentioned here bonded warehouses. That gives a new kind of option or possibility if you have these recognized and you have bonded warehouse somewhere downstream, and you can make use of it, isn't it, Johannes?
Yeah, definitely. Bonded warehouses are a big thing. They have ever been a big thing, but for many companies, and it's not easy to run these bonded warehouses. Sometimes you use 3PLs for that. If you're big enough, you maybe apply yourself. In the US, especially in the US, it's a little bit of a challenge, and they call it their foreign trade zones. And to run that, most, I would say 7 to 80% of companies heavily rely on brokers or 3PLs to run them, because the complexity with talking to the governments is just on another scale. I would say for the future, you should always consider such concepts. Could it be bonded warehouse? Could be FTCs? Could be things like that, which makes it certainly from a duty payment, like a deferral. You don't need to pay it now. You pay it when it's leaving the warehouse, and gives you more financial freedom. Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, but the main thing, the main tip to the audience is, do visualize, do map out your value stream like this, and all the parties involved, all your stakeholders, because that makes you have a better grasp of what's happening in the world, and how do you run your supply chain, what kind of steps are in there, and what are the alternatives. Like you see here, you have some forks in the road where you can dissect. So maybe next, Johannes.
Maybe one thing here, Martin. Yeah. I just wanted to. I completely agree with that statement, because we are often talk to companies, and what we get back, and we always ask the question, hey, can you give us a supply chain map? Can you give us an IT architectural map? And very often, then question marks come up. So really printing down this map for your own knowledge is a great thing. I'm sure you can't do it for all the hundreds and millions of products you're handling, but on a higher scaled level, to see where is the stuff moving from, what are my main countries, and also in the light of optimizing something in the future, it's a great thing.
Yeah. So maybe next, how to identify your risk exposure and avoid costly missteps. Maybe you can run through the different steps companies could take.
Yeah, maybe I begin, David and Martin, and then please chime in for more. I mentioned before, and it's in supply chain, in global trade, all over the place. Master data is almost always the key, because without a proper master data classification, having almost like a product passport to understand what is my stuff, where is it coming from, having the country of origin for your products, having the evaluation, is there some CBAM requirement, can I leverage trade agreements, even before you ship or buy something, is an amazing thing, and you should have that. Then, as a second step, for sure, you should map your exposure. Am I exposed to certain additional duties, countervailing duties? Am I exposed to certain regions where there is maybe a higher risk of not getting my materials in time? Then quantifying the risk to understand how huge is the risk, what can I do to avoid that? Monitoring the KPIs, or even first defining KPIs which you want to monitor, and then permanently monitor them. And we have tools, and we are also having great tools to make analytics, to understand our supply chains, where is the highest risk. That's the way how supply chains can get better, because you identify where's my risk, what are the products on risk, and then you can optimize on that. You can even, we call it tariff engineering. You can say, hey, if I change certain things, if I change nuts, which are coming first from China to Thailand, I'm reducing the tariffs, which makes my product at the end of the day cheaper and more reliable. And that's something you should always consider.
David, I have a question to you, but if I look at this, a lot of the companies want to improve their forecasting accuracy and they want to use AI, but basically you start at the right-hand side, whereas, if you don't have the master data in place, etc., all the previous step, forecast accuracy doesn't make any sense because, you still get it wrong. So that's my take if I look at this. And another thing, what we hear more and more, companies want to have a digital twin. And I know e2open is delivering the Harmony interface. It looks like a map with all the disruptions and the flow. But basically, you get a better visualization of your global supply chain. And then moving through these steps, then you can have a better conversation about the risk and the quantification of this and how to manage all this. So, David, what is it you want to add on this?
To the start of your comment or your question, yes, a lot of the focus in supply chain and indeed in a company, right, beyond supply chain is on the right-hand side. And that's normal and that's healthy, right? Because that's where the products get manufactured. That's where the margins happen. That's where market share is won. And that is rightly the place where the focus is. And with most industries, right, if you've got a handle on your tier one supply, and if your demand forecasting isn't complete rubbish, you can do a lot on that right-hand side. And that's why people focus there. Also because it's nice week to week, month to month. It's noisy. Supply chain people like noise. The reason why this chain is here so long from right to left is because when you're going structural, and global trade is structural, especially when you're going multi-tier bill of material, if you're going country of origin, supplier certification, supplier solicitation, etc., you're dealing with a structural risk, which is a tier 2+ of your supply chain. But that's not something you would plan against, at least not in the majority of companies. Now, we at e2open have had some companies for like literally 15 years, 20 years doing exactly that, right? Getting detailed visibility into their tier 2 supply and their tier 2 manufacturing capacity, sometimes even, right? And then doing shadow planning across tier 2, tier 1, and tier 0 with fantastic effects. But that's a very specific high-tech thing where you have the bomb control is necessary when you're doing high tech. It's different when you're doing makeup or even cars, right? So the operations and the margin is on the right hand side. Making sure that you stay out of jail long enough to enjoy the margin is on the left hand side.
Good to understand that. So getting to actionable strategies, maybe you can explain, Johannes. So what can we do on the short term, and the mid term, and the long term?
Yeah, for sure. And on let's say the short term, again, it's master data as always. Try to ensure for your top maybe 100, top 200, top 1,000 products, you have the right classification. You for HS, but also for the ECN, you have the right origin inside. And it sounds so simple to say have the right origin inside, but we all know in warehouses, often things get mixed up. And if you mix up origin of China with the origin of EU and you bring it in production, it can have an impact on your duties. It can have an impact. Can I ship it to a certain country? So having this really clean up and visualization and knowing where my stuff is coming from is a good thing. Then for sure the review of the costs, the freight, insurance, all of that, to have really a few, what are my total landed costs if I ship something from A to B, but also on the other hand, from a global trade perspective, where you can save a lot of money and ensure a lot of credibility is with brokers to ensure the broker, if you do direct filing, that's a super good thing to do. But for certain countries, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the capacity. Check that your brokers are doing a really good job, and that the clearance process is easy, and that your broker knows the right data, gets the right information. That's something which is really crucial.
Yeah, so Johannes, I think, the immediate wins, that's an area where Gen AI could play a role. I can imagine, with the classification, normally, it's a cumbersome job to go through all that. But in that area, Gen AI and ChatGPT kind of tools should help.
Definitely. If you think about, and we call this concept a global product master, where you have one product ID for all the countries, the associated HS codes, a 27 monitoring of if it's still a valid HS code, yes and no, but also the capability to give you feedback if the HS code is wrong, what would be the right HS code. But then you can also use additional things, and there is classification rulings around to bring some evidence for classification to make the process afterwards. Either you send something to a broker, or you do direct filing, or you send something to some of your clients. Makes it much smoother, because then you have all the information. And you're right, AI can help with that. They can look through 1,000 documents or specifications much faster than a human being.
And what can be done on the midterm?
From a midterm perspective, one thing, and I'm saying that very carefully, it needs to be lawful and documented, the tariff engineering. What I mean with that, you can do, and what you should consider if you do work in supply chains globally, to maybe make this tariff-free engineering, sit together with the purchasing department, with the engineers, but also with the tariff experts and compliance experts, to see where can we source, or how can we optimize our products to lower our tariff rate. Maybe it's a shift of countries, maybe it's a shift of suppliers to make that, or sometimes it's even a shift of pricing to make some beneficial, or use some beneficial trade agreements, and then you can lower your costs even so for certain. And this tariff engineering, if you do it in a proper way, it gives you also a competitive advantage, because maybe some others are not doing that. So that's something you should consider and sit together with them. FTAs is a big thing. Some of our clients, they use plus 100 trade agreements where they leverage really this automation of supplier solicitation, getting long-term supplier declarations, certificates of origin inside, validate them, and then get it all documented in the global product master. So that's things you can do. And besides that, we mentioned that before, special regimes like FTC, a bonded warehouse, which lowers your cost at the beginning, because you don't need to pay the duties until they leave the country or the warehouse. So that's things you can definitely do.
And on a structural level, long term?
Structural level, yeah, there is. It's not easy to shift supply chains and to shift productions and all of that. But from a long-term perspective, if you do and analyze your whole supply chain, and you maybe can do sourcing diversification, but also build up manufacturing places in countries with, let's say, a very low risk profile, or in countries where there is free trade agreements are coming, is something you should look at. But also things to automate using AI to document processing, things like that, to ensure that first all the master data is in a proper way, but then automate the full process to say, I'm importing something from country A to country B, I'm then doing some manufacturing and sending it to country C in an automated way. Because if you have the underlying data, it makes it much easier for a system just to execute on that. And then last but not least, there is this thing about the product passport, which is flowing around in the EU and at the regulatory bodies. Think about that, because I think that's my guess here, that this will come sooner than later.
Yeah. All right, we are almost out of time, and we have some extra 30 minutes, but we get that to that. Basically, this is what I created last June, an overview of the company IT portfolio. You mentioned, do companies have an overview of their own end-to-end supply chain management and the required tools? Sometimes not. This is why we created this kind of overview. You can download it, and David, you have to look at it. Most of the tools are in there somewhere, so this gives a better overview of how this Tetris kind of landscape has been formulated into your company.
Yep, no, and it's funny, or it's not funny. It's perfectly normal to see that you have global trade management and digital product passport right next to each other, and then product lifecycle management right around there. Because what Johannes was describing with the product passport, but also the proper internal one, right? The universal internal product master record and those kind of things. That's what you need to go and get ahead of these problems, and that's why it makes sense for them to be close together, and also to be on an overarching role, right? It's a strategic, structural kind of data, not necessarily analytics, but it's not transactional. It drives transactional, import, export, FTA, but it's the key, like Johannes said multiple times. Without this, the rest don't work, especially in global trade.
So unfortunately we're out of time, in this 60 minutes live, but we have an extra 30 minutes in a virtual lounge. So if you have more questions for David, Johannes, or me, we will be there in the next 30 minutes at table 1 to answer your questions. So for the audience, you can have these links here, and it will be available in the PDF, the IT subway map, how to download your IT portfolio and fill out your own IT portfolio to discuss internally what you need and what are the white spots. There's more. There's a supply chain executive guide on tariffs also available through e2open, and another playbook about the stuff we discussed during this webinar. So for now, I think Johannes, thank you for giving all this explanation about this stuff. Thank you for now. And also, David, thank you for adding your view from an IT perspective with all your knowledge in the last 20 years. So thanks.
Thanks very much for having us.
And the audience, thank you for listening in, either live or in the recording. Thanks for now. And I would like to say, hope to see you next time in another webinar, or I hope to see you in the lounge right after this. Thanks for now, and bye-bye.